Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth and Story, and I'm here to share a really beautiful oracle deck. It's called the Sibyls Oraculum is how I'm saying it. It's, of course, it could be no, it would have to be Oraculum. The idea of the oracle or the oraculum, that's how I pronounce it. The Oracle of the Black Doves of Africa. This is by Tayana Lee McQuiller. And the artwork is by Caitlin V. Voicey. Foisey maybe? Not Voicey, I guess. Foisey. Which is a 44 card deck and book. It is from Destiny Books, is the publisher. I have to say, you know, publication wise, like the cardstock and stuff is pretty horrible, but I think it's worth it. I picked this up at Barnes & Noble's with a coupon. It's about the same right now. I think it's still about $19 on Amazon from what I've seen. I'm not sure entirely, in the US. So it says here, the Oracle of the Black Doves is a system of divination inspired by the Libyan Sibyls, the African prophetess, oh my goodness, as a prophetess, right? Prophetesses. Do you really say that? Prophetesses of the classical world. Prophetesses. Prophetess is female prophet. Prophetess. Prophetesses. Oh my goodness. I wonder if you just don't say that. Of the classical world. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, 2 black doves flew away from the city of Waset, which is Thebes, and established the Siwi Oasis Oracle in Libya and the first oracle in Greece at Dodona. So this is what this is, paying homage to the oft-forgotten African founding mothers of the Sibyllian traditions. Drawing on both the African and the classical traditions, it features full-color paintings by artist Caitlin V. Foisey, who created the card art in a style reminiscent, of the Libyan mosaics popular in the 1st century BCE. So this is what we're looking at. Of course, the black dove caught my attention immediately, just image-wise, and this is the back of the cards, which is stunning. I hadn't heard anything about this. It just really caught my attention. So it comes in this sort of like envelope with Velcro. It doesn't feel like it would stand, the edges don't really feel like it would stand up super well to lots of use. But, you know, I could be surprised, right? We could be surprised. We'll come back to the cardstock in a minute. So it slides in like an envelope here. Again, I have my doubts how well that will stand out. It's something I probably will reinforce with some good, packing tape or something. Reinforce those structures because I do feel like that's going to tear fairly easy. But, it is what it is. So that's that. We have a really nice bound book. It is minus the key in the about, so the actual guidebook is about 140 pages. The beginning section is really fantastic, even though it is not super large. I feel like she put a lot of information in there, as well as giving you, I believe, a bibliography. Yeah, some suggested reading if it's something that interests you. I love suggested readings in books, in guidebooks, because if you're really into, get drawn into the world and it maybe isn't something that you know a lot of, the suggested reading or the bibliographies in the backs are amazing. John Matthews does an extensive job of giving you bibliography and suggested reading, and so I really like seeing that that's there so that I can go and look up some of these things, because I do find this to be really beautiful, although I've read some of it in mythology classes. So that's that. The cardstock is terrible. I'm sorry. I don't think I have anything else by Destiny Press, unless that is a subset of something that I'm just not aware of. I don't feel like, but it is published using solar power. So I don't know. It's quite glossy and it's very thin, extremely thin. So I'm sure it's going to shuffle well. But of course, this could hold up quite well as well. I have my doubts, but it's possible. So it is very glossy and very, very thin. We'll come back to those cards in a moment. The guidebook, I think, here is really fantastic. As you can see, I took it outside and have done some work just reading it. I'm a huge lover of highlighting. So I love, it talks about how, according to the Greek historian Herodotus in the history of Herodotus, the oracle tradition of Greece and eventually Rome originated in Kemet. It says 2 black doves had come flying from Thebes in Kemet, one to Libya and one to Dodona, which is in Greece. The latter settled on an oak tree and there uttered human speech, declaring that a place of divination from Zeus must be made there. The people of Dodona understood that the message was divine and therefore established the oracular shrine. The dove which came to Libya told the Libyans, they say, to make an oracle of Ammon. This also is sacred to Zeus. Such was a story told by the Dodonian priestesses, the eldest of whom was Promenia, and the next Timoret, and the youngest Nyxandra, and the rest of the servants of the temple at Dodona similarly held it to be true. In the ancient Mediterranean world, it talks about how the dove was a symbol of the soul, of the great mother goddess, of innumerable names and her priestesses. It also goes on to talk about how the idea of the dove as a soul is something we also see in Hebrew history, as well as, of course, then kind of carrying over into Christian ideology as well. And in fact, before the cross became very popular as a symbol of Christianity, and the dove still, you still see the dove, but the dove was the kind of a symbol for Christianity in the more classical times. So it does talk a little bit about the, patriarchal versus matriarchal issues at the time in a couple places, which is interesting and is certainly historical, but it does talk about how prior to the advancement and ultimate supremacy of patriarchal values that certainly the Romans brought into sway, and even I think some with the Greek. The temples dedicated to Zeus, Apollo, Dionysus, and other gods were originally the domain of the goddess. And so then after centuries of uninterrupted power, the Sibyls, temples, and mystery schools were all outlawed with the advent of Nicene Christianity. And talks about with Constantine coming into reign and making certain laws and rules and things of that nature. I thought that she did a really good job of explaining sort of the map, so to speak, of how things stood in ancient times. What the Sibyls, the terms Libya, Tamanska, or Tha, or Thamorth, I'm sure slaughtering, refer to the area now known as the Maghreb, which includes present-day Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Mauritania, and the northwestern part of Kemet. So it kind of explains sort of where things were at the time. What is interesting is that she also goes into some really interesting things about astronomy. I'm not going to go, again, you want to get the book if this is something that interests you. But at the very beginning, which I should have started with, I thought that she did a really good job addressing, there's 2 places I thought she addressed really well. The idea of being careful when working with cultures, not our own, number 1, and number 2, that are so ancient in which we really don't know. There's a lot of guesswork. So she has an academic background in cultural anthropology, and so she tries to accurately represent the culture of others. However, when you're talking about ancient societies, she indicates that a lot of what we know is just sophisticated guesswork. And so she acknowledges that. She also talks about the difficulty in putting our biases, our lenses, the way that we see the world now onto past cultures, and that can get in the way of the actual truth, which I think is beautiful. And she does try to use some of the original identities of African people, deities, civilizations, and places, and she puts any foreign terms in italics. for our convenience to have them be more recognizable, but she really tries to keep with the indigenous terminology. She says, it is, I believe, one small step towards the rectification of past insults and injuries, as well as trying to understand people within their own cultural context as best we can. Now, she goes on to give us that cultural context, which I think is fantastic. Again, in a small form, but then she gives, more reading to be done if you want to have more culture, more cultural context. She also, I thought, was really interesting because of this conversation that we have a lot currently going about I totally blanked in my brain, but about misappropriation and this idea of having conglomerates or having sort of eclectic belief systems and borrowing this and borrowing that. I thought it was really interesting because she talks about how the traditional worldview that this deck is coming out was not what we can think of as religious, and so they had no issue in an amalgamation of beliefs. She said the ancient Libyans and Kemetians, I'm not sure how you would say that, were particularly good at incorporating the idea of the foreigners they encountered via commerce, conquest, or immigration without ever destroying their foundational beliefs. But it's important to be noted that in this area, even the greater area, no one at that time was obsessed with purity in regards to race, religion, sex, and so on like people are today, because that came later in history. People felt in no way inauthentic or hypocritical about having multiple creation stories or adding in new goddesses, gods, or the like. The reason being, and this is what I think is so important that I oftentimes think people forget when they're reading mythologies and things of that nature, even some ancient religious texts, is that the ancients focused more on abstract lessons and the underlying symbolism of personages rather than literal and historical facts. So for me personally, I feel like when you read historical texts, even religious texts such as the Bible and things of that nature, that when we try to limit those texts to historical facts, we are actually stripping away the glory of those texts. We are stripping away the meaning that's there by trying to make them factual. And this is not a problem. This would not have been a problem in my understanding of mythology, classes I've taken on mythology and ancient texts and things of that nature. It's not my understanding. This would not have been an issue for the people in these time periods to see and to understand. Again, that idea that sometimes there is more truth in story than in facts. And so it's very easy to incorporate various other layers into your mindset if that's the case. Also a reminder that these cosmopolitan centers in ancient Mediterranean were as racially and culturally diverse as New York or Paris is today. So there were significant portions of the population that were first, second, and third generation immigrants who kept to the pantheons of their homelands, who brought in pantheons of other things. And so there was this amalgamation, and that wasn't a problem at this time period. So I thought that was really interesting, just in terms of the way in which we are also thinking about bringing in layers of different cultures. And of course, that's not directly the idea of misappropriation, but it's part of the larger context and the larger conversation surrounding that, which I think is really beautiful. So again, it talks about obviously the understanding of the symbols and things. So if you look, it's actually not a really big section here. And she even says it's a brief history of the Sibyls. The purpose of this is an oracle deck. I would have loved to have some more actually included in here, but I think what was in here was quite thought-provoking. And again, there is a lot of looks like some very interesting expanded reading. She also talks about the cards. There are no people in the cards whatsoever, so that while the artwork pays homage to the Libyan mosaic art favored by the Roman elite, so we have that, there are no humans represented in any of the cards, so that reader is allowed to focus solely on the symbolism of each image without distraction. The symbols included in the deck reflect the rich cultural diversity of the ancient Mediterranean. Oh, I cannot, I've said this 4 times. Mediterranean people who mated, mixed, and borrowed ideas from one another for millennia. And so that I thought was also fantastic. So she goes on, again, there's more religious and mythological associations that are there, a lot of discussion about how monotheistic, some discussion between monotheistic and polytheistic, as well as the message of worshiping more than one god out of different pantheons, known as henotheism, which is something that was quite normal. It wouldn't have been thought of as strangely at the time. It does talk about masculine and feminine energy that we often see in the old mythologies, and the old gods and goddesses, wives and husbands or consorts, as masculine and feminine energy, and that's problematic for you. Just kind of pull that out from the way that you see things. She also goes on to talk about sort of the overall worldview of this area of Africa, as well as the Mediterranean area that these images and ideas come out of. She does also note that this area was never monolithic, and so that there always was multicultural, different ethnic groups, different social structures and everything, but she tried to bring out what were sort of basic worldview of the area, and tried her best, in her words, for all of the suggestions and all of the basic meanings, to try to keep them that in a way that suited or that was in alignment with this overall worldview. So I thought that she, at least in terms of the guidebook or in terms of what she said, she certainly has, you can tell that she's an anthropologist and seems to be doing the best she can with a culture that, as she already said, is really about sophisticated guesswork when it really comes down to it. I love this at the end. She said that according to traditional African wisdom, the universe will forever be a special and enchanted place filled with equally fantastic beings in all forms where anything is possible. It is a created and also a co-creative space where all may participate in the perpetuation of that which is already in motion, or choose to create new pathways. This was the world of the Sibyls, and it is your world every time you consult this oracle. I thought that was really well done. And so that brings us to the setup of the deck. So there are, hopefully you can see that there are actually 4 colored backs. There are what's sort of a gray tone black back, which are core issues. So these are essential spiritual principles that you should think about in relationship to the question. There are, and there's 11 of each. There are this kind of coppery, almost brownish red tone here that is the projection cards. This is interesting because this is the ideas that we often project on situations, and why that might be causing some blockages and some obstacles. So there's a whole suit of that, which I love. And then there are 2 suits, this sort of blue tone and red tone of action cards. This is an internal way in which we need to sort of adjust our internal landscape regarding a situation. And then the second one are the hot action cards, which, as it describes here, the blue set relates to the suggested internal state of mind you should foster, and the red set relates to suggested external response to the situation. So this is how it suggested that you respond to the situation. So we have 4 suits here. They are all shuffled together, but the primary reading is taking 1 from each of these. So it's a 4-card reading, and that's the primary way. It's the only way she discusses using these cards. Now that's not to say you couldn't use them in other ways, but that's how the deck is set up to be read. I'm not going to shuffle these obviously yet till we go through each of those suits. And then she talks about how to shuffle. I will do that in a second. So despite the cardstock not being great, and despite the heavy glare, which I obviously wish was not the case, they are really beautiful. There is a little bit of a darkness factor to them because there is sort of an aged look that's supposed to be there. They look like ancient mosaics, which do make them certainly a little bit dark in tone, but I think they're absolutely beautiful. One of the reasons when I saw just the images of this, I thought, oh, I'm always looking for oracle decks that look good with older traditional style tarot decks, and I feel like this is one that would be well suited, which we'll check at the end. So the first 11 cards here are relating to, there's also a whole section in this book about doing a core issue assessment, but I'm not going to get into that. In terms of the, I guess I should have done this first, but in terms of the section on the cards, you have the name as well as in English, and then you have sort of a key phrase. You have key symbols, so what are the symbols in the card? Love that. You have any religious or mythological associations given to you, a section. Then you have a section of commentary, and then you have a section of questions. So if this card comes up, what kind of questions might it be asking of you? So I think that that is quite a lot of information. They generally have about 3 pages, some more, some less, but a minimum of 2 1/4 pages of information. I think a lot depending on how much religious or mythological associations there might be. So here we have the beautiful mysteries, and I really love this. It has a symbol of a crow, which of course makes me very happy. So it talks about how that the crow represents intelligence, right? It talks about the scroll representing the mystery of all the ages. It talks about the roses there representing the beginning of a desire to seek the unknown. So it goes into each one of the symbols of the card and explains what those might mean, and I think that that is fantastic. That tells me that it's something that is created with intention, and I love that. The purpose of this, though, is threefold, which I quite love. It talks about, this tells us not to stop, that we need to stop believing in the unknowable as an intrinsic fact. So all things are knowable. They may not be knowable right now, but they are knowable. It says to stop believing that you can't be the vehicle for the solution. And also then we also sometimes just have to wait for the right timing. So quite a lot of information, I think, is such beautiful. Here we have a beautiful wisdom card. I don't know if she says, let me see. I felt like maybe it was Latin. The next one is a Latin word, but I don't know for sure about that. And I would also guess that sometimes what we now know as Latin is a confluence of different things. So I'm not sure. I can't find exactly where it's stated what the language used is, and maybe a little bit of both, or be a mix of different things. I'm not sure. I'm just going to go off of the English. So that we have the mysteries. The next one we have is wisdom, which I think is beautiful. The idea of the tree of life, of course, is one that is from many different places, which I think is gorgeous. This has Anatha or Nith was the indigenous moon goddess of Libya, with 3 aspects as Athena for the new moon, Metis as the full moon, and Medusa as the dark moon. The worship of Anatha spread to Kemet, while only her new moon aspect as Athena was accepted in Greece. Her dark warrior aspect was Hellenized as a hideous monster that turned men into stone. So then we get the Medusa mythologies. So it's really interesting if you're, like me, interested in mythologies as well as cultural references. It gives you enough to at least get you started if you're interested in looking further. It also connects some of the bridges because so many of those Greek, Roman, Mediterranean gods and goddesses they were conglomerate. They were pulled from each other and passed around and shifted and changed and morphed. And so it kind of gives you those connective lines, which I think is interesting. But this is about wisdom is evolution, it says. It is being one way, reaching the limit of that way, and making a new way, then integrating all ways as a situation demands, which I think is beautiful. Anyways, it's great. I really like the way that she writes in the guidebook. Again, it's not super long-winded or anything, but I feel like it gives you enough. The next card is so beautiful. It's called Unity. Again, it kind of shows representation. The fountain represents communal reflection, refreshment, healing, these types of things. And it talks about how throughout the Mediterranean world, sacred fountains attracted pilgrims from all others. We have the white doves for the power of love. It was sort of a universal symbol. And then it, again, goes into religious and or mythological associations. And I think that these are words that make sense even without those contexts, but I think it's going to be enriched by reading the context. So in this section that we're looking at are the core issues. So these are essential spiritual principles that we would reflect on or apply to the different, the situation that we're reading for. So the idea of unity, right? The idea of opposition. Opposition is certain. This is one thing I love about this deck is that there are equally, not equally, perhaps I haven't gone through and checked that, but there's a large amount of shadow involved as well because that is part of life, right? So we have opposition here. We have death as well. The only distance is death. Gebel al-Mauta, aka the Mountain of the Dead, at the Siwa Oasis in Libya is thus called because the hill contains several tombs that date from the 26th dynasty and the Greco-Roman periods of Kemet. It represents the perception of death by the living. The remains of bones and artifacts of the nobles buried here only signify their apparent end. And so this is a hard one to kind of see because, again, some of these cards are a little bit darker. It's actually in my viewfinder showing up later than they look in person, but you can see it's quite amazing here. And it goes on to talk about the fact that death is usually understood as the end, but this is an unscientific position that we continue to perpetuate because we become emotionally attached to specific forms in specific ways. Most of us have heard that matter cannot be created or destroyed, but that is of little importance when we are grieving what such a short time ago was present that suddenly has become past. So it does talk about this idea of the ending of something, but then it's becoming something new because nothing just dissipates. So that's, again, beautiful. We have the idea of transformation here. The swan represents flexibility and gracefulness. We have accumulation. This is an interesting one. The bees here represent productivity, sacrifice, teamwork, focus, and order. Their entire existence is dedicated to accumulation for the sake of community, which is really important. We talked about here. And it just talks about accumulation, but in the term of contentment and in the term of what it is that we need. So that we have that. And then I think that, nope, that is not the last. Wait. Yeah, that's not the last. We have limitation. The blooming tree symbolizes existence in all of its lushness. The leash dog represents our ego's experience of limitation. The canine is comfortable until it encounters that which is unfamiliar to it. The only way to make it stop barking is to separate it from the source of agitation or otherwise distract it. It talks about boundaries and limitations. We obviously have a leash dog who's come to the end of his leash as well. Here we have the idea of rhythm. And really speaking, of course, to do with the rhythm of life. This came up in my first poem, which I thought was really beautiful. And then we have the idea of gratitude. I really like this one of vibration. The peacock literally represents vibration because its feathers vibrate when it wants to communicate. And it really talks about the law of vibration that might make us uncomfortable because it means that none of us are victims and we are responsible for every vibe we put out there. If this concept is new to you, it may seem cold and frightening, but it is in fact quite the contrary. There is tremendous freedom and power in knowing that payment will always be made and that you can decide to cut a check or create a new bill anytime you choose. A little bit more of the idea of karma here. I'll have to read more about this one. Yeah, this is the same notion prescribed in the universal law of attraction, which is also known as karma, or the law of vibration, or of any other term used to describe the idea that like attracts like. So, and I think and that's something that I work with. Like, I think that sometimes law of attraction ideas, we've talked about this on our channel, on this channel, and I think obviously other people have as well, that the idea of law of attraction can be taken to extremes, which can be very harsh. But at the same time, I am a person that does believe that we inherently, what we are putting out, we do attract back to us, or certainly we pave the way for that to come to us easier. If we are continually putting out negative energy, that is going to, in some way, no matter what, have an impact on what we have come back to us. Whereas if we are continually putting out high vibration, even if that doesn't mean our world is always going to be a happier place, we are certainly in a better position to be open to that, to see it when it's coming, because sometimes when we're in a negative space, good things are coming that we don't even see, and so forth. So I think that that's a great card to have in a deck. How far you take that would depend on your view of the world, obviously. So then the next section are projection cards. These are rationalizations or justifications that we use that stop us from being able to see what is really going on. So justice, sometimes we think we are doing something out of the realm of justice. No matter what consequences, no matter what the cost, we're doing this because it is just. And so sometimes that is something that we are keeping us from really seeing the core issue. Even though it's not a negative idea, it can stop us from really seeing the whole picture when we're just seeing through this one viewpoint and not going to deviate or see it all outside of it. Rage, out of anger. So you can see that the background has changed from black to copper. Anger, we're seeing purely out of rage and we can't see the situation. The mirror card I thought was really an interesting one because we're sometimes seeing it's self-knowledge. So that's not anything that is I'm just going to read this really quick. If you get the mirror in a reading, it is highly unlikely that you have a clear awareness of how your words and or actions have created the circumstance you are now experiencing. It is being mirrored back to you. The way that you are thinking or seeing is being reflected back to you. So that is really interesting. This I think could come up in very interesting ways. We have purpose. Again, these don't have to be negative to mean that you can really be giving a strong purpose to a situation that isn't maybe there, that you might actually be putting onto the situation. So it's really asking you to think about how these ways of seeing are stopping you from actually seeing behind it to the actual situation. avarice, you know, the desire for gaining something can often skew the way that we see something, right? Complexity. And how beautiful is that? You're choosing to ignore the obvious. In fact, you're probably not even surprised by the core issue card you're selected. Sometimes we're making things more complex. In other words, we consciously decide to make a simple situation way more complicated because we fear losing, starting over, waiting longer, or seeking the help that we need. That is so true. Lust. And of course, that is not just to do with sex there. It's that idea of lusting after something, just wanting something. So that's interesting to see. Let me look here, how that would be different from avarice, which is kind of similar. The desire, avarice is shown as a desire for more than you need. You might be seeking more than what is necessary to be satisfied. Lust is being shown as when the need to gratify a desire is out of control. So that's interesting. I'll have to definitely play with both of those. I think you could, there's overlap on those, but not in a way that it makes them not necessary. Confusion, we're simply not seeing things clearly. Doubt. Makes sense. It says doubt has gotten a bad rap for a long time and is often blamed for many failures. But I think that that's unfair. Doubt serves a very useful function in everyday life. If we never had doubts, we would blindly follow everything anyone ever said to us without question. Therefore, without doubt, we would never have become seekers. Doubt is like the arrow that pops up on a computer screen once you've moved the mouse or the cursor. There are several options to click, but the arrow has no mind of its own which to consider and to select. That is your job. So if you get doubt in a reading, you should reflect on the most frightening points related to the core issue. If you feel extremely uncomfortable, it's probably because the core issue revealed that in order for you to succeed, you will have to change or leave your comfort zone. If you doubt whether you're capable of dealing with the core issue, then understand that you might be choosing predictable mediocrity over greater possibilities. That's an interesting one. I like that. Pride, of course, that certainly makes sense. Very often we can't see clearly because of pride. Contentment. If you get contentment in a reading, you are choosing to smile on the outside while you suffer silently on the inside. You are being warned to take the necessary steps to change the situation or risk missing out on rich opportunities. So yeah, if you're just saying, I know things aren't the way they should be, or I know they could be better, but I'm just going to stay right where I am, I'm not going to make any waves. So contentment can stop you from moving forward. So those are the first two sections, one being sort of the spiritual basis for the situation that you should be seeing as. The second are ways of thinking that stops us from seeing clearly. And then the third and the fourth section are both action, but one is focused inward. And then the next one, so the blue is internal, state of mind that you should kind of change your way of thinking. And then the red are external things that you should do or a change. So we have the first card, and these actually, when we get to the choice cards, they change to, oops, let's see. So I might have these mixed up, but that's okay. They change, maybe I don't have blue next. Yeah, it's kind of purpley looking more than blue, but I have these a little bit. Oh no, I have it right. I have it right. In the guidebook, it changes to a much shorter. We have a basic key phrase, a key symbol, which is a broken rose here, a key religious or mythological association, such as this is related to Hecate, the goddess of the wilderness, magic, and witches. And a key very brief meaning. So for example, this one is just stop obsessing and completely let go of any emotion emotional attachments related to the matter in question. Detach, get away from the situation, right? So they become much more concise because these are actions that need to happen internally first, and then also the other one are externally. So these, the next one is questioning. You need to question, right? Seek answers. Don't stop questioning until you get the answer. I love that look of that card. We have analysis, a hemotep. This is associated with a hemotep, a polymath, a nobleman. Laboratory spatulas were used to examine and probe substances. Honestly review your intentions and motivations. It's time for some analysis, internal analysis. Synthesis, put everything together. Take it all into one and sort of synthesize the situation. Prioritizing. Review your top priorities and kind of let's focus in on what the priorities in the situation are. Submission. This is interesting, right? So a lot of us, especially that come out of certain religious contexts, can have a little bit of problem with the term and the idea of submission. But this is saying yield to whatever you consider to be the superior force in the question of the matter. This is not an act of weakness, but one of strength. And so it does go on to talk a little bit about, again, there's not too much there because this is a short one. This is one I would have liked a longer one. But it does talk a little bit about this because of where the civilizations were at, being completely submissive to nature's processes that were inevitable. You can't avoid them. So there's certain things that are simply outside of your ability to control, and you have to just accept that. And so that's interesting. We have measurement. So this is the idea of how much does this mean to you, right? How important is this? Really take measurement of whether this is worth fighting over, struggling over. It's time to sort of take measurement of the situation. I really love these cards. We have, I'm going to, nope, still in here. So we have the idea of desire. This one has a little bit longer one. Dare to want it. Because this is saying this is a way in which we should internalize. That we should know that if whatever you're currently doing will not help you attain what you desire, then you must do something else. You have to figure out what it is that you really desire. Your dreams are sacred. No one or nothing has a right to negate, defile, or molest your dreams. We have optimism, taking in internally that idea of optimism. Strategy, it's time to strategize, right? It's time to figure out what you want, but then brainstorm how you're going to get there. We have then a taking initiative here. Prepare your mind to move. In Dungeons and Dragons, because I'm knee deep in working out how to DM and stuff, you're at the beginning of every battle, it's rolling initiative. It's like, okay, roll initiative, and you know, okay, we're doing this here. So prepare your mind, and it really does. When the DM says roll for initiative, everybody knows, okay, we're going into battle, and their brain starts to move into that strategy mode. And this is exactly what this is. Prepare your mind to move. No matter how small the step might be, you're getting ready to make a step, so get prepared. I love it. Okay, and so then that takes us to the hot action cards. And so they turn into more of a red back here. And so these cards, again, are more external things that you need to change. So staying clean in the situation with the idea of purity. Again, I'm just kind of giving you the brief synopsis here. Speed, this is a time to stop thinking about it. It's time to act and get moving, which you can really see here with the card. I think this is beautiful. Nurturing. Make sure you are encouraging and nurturing the qualities and circumstances and people that you want to have around you. Nurture your garden. Take care of your garden. Here we have gradual progress. Take things one step at a time. And this has actually got an image of the larynx or the voice box. represents unseen processes. The beginning of everything we see started with words, but it takes place first internally before it goes outward. That's really interesting. The whole thing about this is quite interesting. Anyways, take things one step at a time and you will get there. Abandonment. Sometimes it's just time to let things go. There are times in which we're just holding on to something that we shouldn't. Transcendence. This is, taking the high road, right? This is putting the ego in check and make sure that you are sort of transcending the situation. Stillness. Right now, this is not a time for action. I love this image with the crocodile. This is not a time for movement. It's a time to sit and wait. Aggression. Sometimes, force is warranted. Sometimes we do have to stand up and aggressively move at an obstacle, and this indicates that. Disguise. To survive this, you must enhance or further develop other qualities within yourself. Adaptation is not being fake. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. That is interesting. All personality types exist within us, and they may be accessed when needed. You may be needing to put on a different mask, so to speak, to deal with a situation. Play. This is that idea of finding the beauty and the joy in a situation. It may be hard to do. And then lastly is the card for defense. Honor your truth by protecting it from all that would attack it, including yourself. How interesting. The fascinus was a popular Roman amulet in the shape of a phallus. It protected its wearer from envy, malevolent magic, and the evil eye. Ah, yes, you can see it here. I didn't see that. When I had this card come up in my first reading, and I kind of saw it as an anchor. But no. So defend your point by making it sharp. It says, honor your truth. So there are all the cards. Let me scroll back out here. So even though you are actually pulling from one of each of the suits, in terms of the instructions to how to do a reading, it does have you shuffle all of them. And again, these cards are really thin. Now, I do have another deck that are really, really, really thin that you feel like it would be horrible, which is my Madame Endora's fortune-telling cards. And that deck has stood up under a lot of reading. So I can't say that because this is really thin cardstock that means it's going to fall apart. I will say that the Madame Endora's it doesn't have any lamination on it, so it feels a little bit nicer, where this just kind of feels like cheap cardstock, but certainly easy to riffle. Only time will tell if it actually holds up. I'm just trying to give it some good shuffles here. So the point here in this, in the only reading that's shown, is to take and a look at each area for a situation. What I like is that the sort of layout of the question is kind of the way you might approach a Sibyl, right, or an oracle. And your question isn't so much saying what should I do. More, it's comment on. So comment on how I should find more stability in my life. Comment on what I need to know regarding this relationship. And then you're looking at each of those four areas. What is a ideology, a way that you should be kind of approaching the situation? What is a way of thinking about the situation that's blocking you from any forward movement? And then what is the internal action and the external action that you should be taking there, or at least should influence how you move forward? So what it has you do is shuffle the cards and then pick one from each. You pick the black, you shuffle again. Now I'm just going to, for the sake of this, pick the first black that comes up and pick rhythm. And then it has you continually think about the question. you know, and shuffle, shuffle, shuffle however you want. And then the next you're going to pick is a copper. Now I will say that the copper and the red can be difficult sometimes, but they are different. I don't know if you're going to be able to pick up on it in the screen, but you do have to kind of think a little bit. But this very first card is a copper card, so I'm going to take that. Making things too complicated. That should probably come up with everything every time I do a reading for myself. You know, understanding so in terms of this, whatever situation this might be, understanding what is the rhythm, that there are rhythms and cycles to life, and that we need to move within those rhythms, and not make things so complicated, as we see in the second. So then you would continue to shuffle, and you would find the first blue card. Well, I'm just doing the first one. You can pick any blue card that speaks to you. So then we have this idea of synthesis, bringing all of the pieces together so that they can work together. And then lastly, and this is internalized, bring in everything that you know about the situation. Bring it all in. Don't try to hide from certain parts of it. Don't try to just honestly and openly bring everything internally about the situation together so that you can get a good synthesis of what the problem is. You may be just, you know, looking at your piece or what you want to believe about a certain situation, but you've got to bring all of it together in order to really get to the heart of things. And then you would find a red, which would be an external. So keeping with what I'm doing, the first red one here would be stillness. So that's really interesting, right? Because in terms of whatever the situation may be, understand that there are rhythms and cycles in life, and that's to be expected, and we can't really fight that. We're going to always work better if we're working with the rhythms, right? Don't overcomplicate things. Instead, bring everything together, all of the bits and bobs of things, bring it all into being and into your internal space, and then sit with it. Sit with it, because sometimes the answer is that we have to wait. We need to sit with all of it together, and then something is going to be coming. But right now it's about waiting, and we don't, you know, people don't like to get the wait cards, do they? But very often it's the case. It's just not the right timing. So how beautiful is that? Now I'm going to put a couple older decks next to this, because I feel like this is a deck that will look beautiful with some older decks. It would look, yeah, see how lovely that would look even with that. There's just so many modern oracle decks that just kind of clash with the aesthetic of an older style deck, and I feel like this deck is going to actually complement, or it's certainly not clash with it. And also, there's a lot of ways you could do that depending on what you were looking for. You could pull a card of what is blocking, right, and what is an action that needs to be taken, or what is blocking and what you need to change in your internal landscape to unblock it, and pull from those particular suits. So I feel like there's a lot that you could do with this in conjunction with a tarot reading, but I really thought, look at how gorgeous that will be with the Lenormand as well. So I do think that I was right in my initial assessment that this is one that will certainly go well with older style decks. But I also feel just now, after having read the guidebook and done a couple readings with it, it's got a beautiful, really concise message, and I love that there is that we're looking at kind of two positives in terms of, well, we're looking at how the overview we should be having and what's blocking us, right? And then so we have that balance there, and then we have the internal and the external action. So I feel like it's a really beautiful balanced deck in a way that we don't always see in oracle decks. So there we have it. I hope that you enjoyed this. I think that I am going to really enjoy working with this particular deck. And I love the artwork. Again, I wish the cardstock was nicer. I wish it was perhaps slightly brighter in tone. I don't know how that's picking up in the video, but in person it is slightly dark, the images, because it's meant to look like an old distressed mosaic, but I do wish it was just slightly brighter. I don't want it to be bright, but just a little bit brighter, but it's very easy to see, and certainly holds beautifully. You know, another thing that this would go beautifully with would be Deste. I think that these, it's certainly not, you know, it wouldn't visually clash with Deste, but also I feel like the ideology and the mindset would also go well with Deste. So there you have it. This has been a look at the Sibyls Oraculum, Oracle of the Black Doves of Africa by Tayana Lee McQuellar. Artwork by Caitlin Foisey. Hopefully I'm not slaughtering your name. I'm really excited about this deck and getting some great deal of use out of this one. It's anything to do with mythology, but doing it in a way in which is in keeping with and being reverent to those different cultures, I think is always excites me, and this is as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a wonderful day.